The Belgae were a large confederation of tribes living in northern Gaul, between the English Channel and the west bank of the Rhine, from at least the 3rd century BC. They were discussed in depth by Julius Caesar in his account of his wars in Gaul. Some peoples in Britain were also called Belgae, and O'Reilly equated them with the verb Bolg in Ireland. The Belgae gave their name to the Roman province of Gallia Belgica and, very much later, to the modern country of Belgium. Etymology. The consensus among linguists is that the ethnic name Belgae comes from the Proto-Celtic root *Belg or *Bolg, meaning to swell, cognate with the Dutch adjective gebolg, to be very angry, and verb olgen, being angry, and the Old English verb belgaan, to be angry, derived ultimately from the Proto-Indo-European root *beg. Thus, a Proto-Celtic ethnic name *Bolg could be interpreted as the people who swell. Origins of the Belgae. Julius Caesar describes Gaul at the time of his conquest as divided into 3 parts, inhabited by the Aquitani in the southwest, the Gauls of the bigger central part, who in their own language were called Celta, and the Belgae in the north. Each of these 3 parts was different in terms of customs, laws, and language. He noted that the Belgae were the bravest of the 3 peoples, being farthest removed from the highly developed civilization of the Roman province, least often visited by merchants with enervating luxuries for sale, and nearest to the Germans across the Rhine, with whom they are continually at war. Ancient sources such as Caesar are not always clear about the things used to define ethnicity today. While Caesar or his sources describe the Belgae as distinctly different from the Gauls, Strabo stated that the differences between the Celts and Belgae, in countenance, language, politics, and way of life was a small one. Unlike the difference between the Aquitanians and Celts, the fact that the Belgae were living in Gaul means that in one sense they were Gauls. This may be Caesar's meaning when he says, the Belgae have the same method of attacking a fortress as the rest of the Gauls. Some translators of Caesar have given crucially different interpretations of his meaning in another passage on the Belgae. W.A. McDevitter and W.S. Bone rendered the Latin of Caesar in Bello Gallico 2:4 as, when Caesar inquired, he received the following information: that the greater part of the Belgae were sprung from the Germans, and that having crossed the Rhine at an early period, they had settled there, on account of the fertility of the country. A more modern translation gives the same section as the envoys stated that most of the Belgae were descended from tribes which long ago came across the Rhine from Germany and settled in this part of Gaul on account of its fertility. So Caesar's use of the word Germani needs special consideration. He uses it in 2 ways. He describes a grouping of tribes within the Belgic alliance as the Germani, distinguishing them from their neighbors. The most important in his battles were the Eber ones. The other way he uses the term is to refer to any tribe considered to be of similar ancestry and traditions, with ancestry east of the Rhine. So the Germani amongst the Belgae were called Germani Cisrhenani, to distinguish them from other Germani, such as those living on the east of the Rhine, in the presumed homeland of the Germani. The later historian Tacitus was informed that the name Germania was recent in his day. The first people to cross the Rhine and oust the Gauls, those now called Tungri, were then called Germani. It was the name of this nation, not a race, that gradually came into general use. And so, to begin with, they were all called Germani after the conquerors because of the terror these inspired, and then, once the name had been devised, they adopted it themselves. In other words, the collective name Germani had first been used by the Gauls or Belgae for the intruders from beyond the Rhine, and was later adopted as a collective name by the Germani themselves. Language. Many modern scholars believe that the Belgae were a firmly Celtic-speaking group. However, at least part of the Belgae may also have had significant genetic, cultural, and historical connections to peoples east of the Rhine, including Germanic peoples, judging from archaeological, place name, and textual evidence. It has also been argued based on place name studies that the older language of the area, though apparently Indo-European, was not Celtic, and that Celtic, though influential amongst the elite, might never have been the main language of the part of the Belgic area north of the Ardennes. For example, Moritz Gieseling suggests that prior to Celtic and Germanic influences, the Belgae may have comprised a distinct Indo-European branch, termed Belgian. On the other hand, most of the Belgic tribal and personal names recorded are identifiably Gaulish, including those of the Germani Cisrhenani. And this is indeed also true of the tribes immediately over the Rhine at this time, such as the Tencterian Usurpetes. Surviving inscriptions also indicate that Gaulish was spoken in at least part of Belgic territory. The Romans were not precise in their ethnography of northern barbarians. By Germanic, Caesar may simply have meant originating east of the Rhine, with no distinction of language intended. The east of the Rhine was not necessarily inhabited by Germanic speakers at this time. It has been remarked that Germanic language speakers might have been no closer than the River Elbe in the time of Caesar. However, studies of place names such as those of Moritz Gieseling have been argued to show evidence of the pre-Roman presence of early Germanic languages throughout the Belgic area north of the Ardennes, where the Germani Cisrhenani lived. The sound changes described by Grimm's law appear to have affected names with older forms, apparently already in the 2nd century BC. Strong evidence for Old Celtic place names, though, is found in the Ardennes and to the south of them. According to Strabo, the country of the Belgae extended along the coast where 15 tribes were living from the Rhenus to the Liger. Strabo also says that Augustus Caesar, when dividing the country into 4 parts, united the Celta to the Narbonnese, the Aquitani he preserved the same as Julius Caesar, but added thereto 14 other nations of those who dwelt between the Garonne and the River Loire, and dividing the rest into 2 parts. The one extending to the upper districts of the Rhine he made dependent upon Lugdunum, the other he assigned to the Belgae, apart from the Germani. The report of Caesar seems to indicate that more of the Belgae had some Germanic ancestry and ethnicity, but this is not necessarily what defines a tribe as Belgic. Edith Whiteman proposed that Caesar can be read as treating only the southwestern Belgic tribes, the Suessinis, Biro-Manjor, and Ambiani, and perhaps some of their neighbors, as the true ethnic Belgae, as opposed to those in a political and military alliance with them. She reads Caesar as implying a transition zone of mixed ethnicity and ancestry for the Menapi, Nervii, and Marini, all living in the northwest of the Belgic region, neighbors to the Germani Cisrhenani in the northeast. It seems that, whatever their Germanic ancestry, at least some of the Belgic tribes spoke a variety of the Celtic Gaulish language as their main language by Caesar's time, and all of them used such languages in at least some contexts. Luc van Derm summarizes competing evidence of Celtic and Germanic influence at the time of Caesar by saying that one has to accept the rather remarkable conclusion that Caesar must have witnessed a situation opposing Celtic and Germanic in Belgium, in a territory slightly more to the south than the early medieval Romance Germanic language border. But van Derm accepts that Germanic did not block Celticization coming from the south, so both phenomena were simultaneous and interfering. The medieval Gesta Treverorum compiled by monks of Trier claims that the Belgae were descendants of Trebetta, an otherwise unattested legendary founder of Trier, the Roman Augusta Treverorum, Augusta of the Treveri, tribes of the Belgae. Caesar names the following as Belgic tribes. Later, Tacitus mentioned a tribe called the Tungri living where the Germani Cisrhenani had lived, and he also stated that they had once been called the Germani. Other tribes that may have been included among the Belgae in some contexts were the Luci, Treviri, and Mediamatrici. Posidonius includes the Armoricani as well. Conquest of the Belgae. Caesar conquered the Belgae, beginning in 57 BC. He writes that the Belgae were conspiring and arming themselves in response to his earlier conquests. To counter this threat, he raised 2 new legions and ordered his Gallic allies, the Aedui, to invade the territory of the Bellovaci. Wary of the numbers and bravery of the Belgae, he initially avoided a pitched battle, resorting mainly to cavalry skirmishes to probe their strengths and weaknesses. Once he was satisfied his troops were a match for them, he made camp on a low hill protected by a marsh at the front and the river Ain behind, near Bibrax in the territory of the Remi. The Belgae attacked over the river, but were repulsed after a fierce battle. Realizing they could not dislodge the Romans and aware of the approach of the Aedui into the lands of the Bellovaci, the Belgae decided to disband their combined force and return to their own lands. Caesar's informants advised him that whichever tribe Caesar attacked first, the others would come to their defense. They broke camp shortly before midnight. At daybreak, satisfied the retreat was not a trap, Caesar sent cavalry to harass the rear guard, followed by 3 legions. Many of the Belgae were killed in battle. Caesar next marched into the territory of the Suetians and besieged the town of Novia Dunum. Seeing the Roman siege engines, the Suetians surrendered, whereupon Caesar turned his attention to the Bellovaci, who had retreated into the fortress of Bratuspantium. They quickly surrendered, as did the Ambiani. The Nervii, along with the Atrebates and Viromanjorg, decided to fight. They concealed themselves in the forests and attacked the approaching Roman column at the river Sabus. Their attack was quick and unexpected. The element of surprise briefly left the Romans exposed. Some of the Romans did not have time to take the covers off their shields or to even put on their helmets. However, Caesar grabbed a shield, made his way to the front line, and quickly organized his forces. The 2 Roman legions guarding the baggage train at the rear finally arrived and helped to turn the tide of the battle. Caesar says the Nervii were almost annihilated in the battle, and is effusive in his tribute to their bravery, calling them heroes. The Attuatici, who were marching to their aid, turned back on hearing of the defeat and retreated to one stronghold, were put under siege, and soon surrendered and handed over their arms. However, the surrender was a ploy, and the Attuatici, armed with weapons they had hidden, tried to break out during the night. The Romans had the advantage of position and killed 4,000. The rest, about 53,000, were sold into slavery. In 53 BC, the Eburones, led by Ambiorix, along with the Nervii, Menapi, and Marini, revolted again and wiped out 15 cohorts, only to be put down by Caesar. The Belgae fought in the uprising of Vercingetorix in 52 BC. After their final subjugation, Caesar combined the 3 parts of Gaul, the territory of the Belgae, Celta, and Aquitaine, into a single unwieldy province that was reorganized by the Emperor Augustus into its traditional cultural divisions. The province of Gallia Belgica was bounded on its east by the Rhine and extended all the way from the North Sea to Lake Constance, including parts of what is now western Switzerland, with its capital at the city of the Remi. Under Diocletian, Belgica Prima and Belgica Secunda formed part of the Diocese of Gaul. Belgae outside Gaul, Britain. The Belgae had made their way across the English Channel into southern Britain in Caesar's time. Caesar asserts they had first crossed the Channel as raiders, only later establishing themselves on the island. The precise extent of their conquest is unknown. After the Roman conquest of Britain, the civitas of the Belgae was bordered to the north by the British Atrebates, who were also a Belgic tribe, and to the east by the Regnenses, who were probably linked to the Belgae as well. The arrival and spread of Aylesford Swaling pottery across the southeastern corner of Britain has been related to the Belgic invasion since Arthur Evans published his excavation of Aylesford in 1890, which was then thought to show the demonstrable reality of a Belgic invasion. According to Sir Barry Cunliffe, although more recent studies tend to downplay the role of migration in favor of increasing trade links, the question remains unclear. A large number of coins of the Ambiani dating to the mid-2nd century BC have been found in southern Britain, and the remains of a possible Belgic fort have been unearthed in Kent. Within memory of Caesar's time, a king of the Suessians called Diviciacus was not only the most powerful king of Belgic Gaul, but also ruled territory in Britain. Commius of the Atrebates, Caesar's former ally, fled to Britain after participating in Vercingetorix's rebellion and either joined or established a British branch of his tribe. Based on the development of imagery on coins, by the time of the Roman conquest, some of the tribes of southeastern Britain likely were ruled by a Belgic nobility and were culturally influenced by them. The later civitas of Roman Britain had towns including Portus Aderni and Clausentum. The civitas capital was at Venta Belgarum, which was built on top of an Iron Age oppidum, which remains the Hampshire county town to this day. Ireland. T.F. O'Rahilly claims in his invasion model that a branch of the Belgae also settled in Ireland, and were later represented by the historical Ivany, Ulaid, and other kindreds. He claims a variety of evidence suggests memories of this were preserved in later Irish tradition, and also makes an elaborate linguistic case. According to his theory, the name of the legendary Furby Olg is the Irish equivalent of Belgae.